I'm president at the River Delta Historical Society, and I don't do much of anything. We've been around for 50, 60 years. We have a lot to learn from you. So congratulate, you need to clap for yourself.
Yay.
So I am going to try to do this 26 different topics. Some will go a little bit longer, some shorter. Instead of a traditional Q&A, if you find that I have said something totally wrong and want to correct me, please do. And if there's something that you can add to it, we'll see if we can get you up as well. So my clicker. All right, so I just do this one. And you're not going to be able to see this as well as I do. Has anybody ever heard the term agriburbs? Thank you, Mark. You would. So agriburbs is what Orangevale was. It was the first agriburb in this area. Folsom, all of the others ended up joining later. There was a movement, mostly because of industrialization, by the way, to start getting people out of the cities and into places close to cities with good transportation systems. And that is literally, that's my version of how this place kind of started. So it was a boosterism that started kind of here for this area. And I'm hoping to tell you some things you know and some things you don't know. Max Baer, how many of you heard of Max Baer? So, and I apologize, it starts with a B as well. I forgot to write it down. My friend Tom Herzog was the one who told me. Max Baer used to do his training in a farm out here in Orangevale. Did anybody else know? And he would run the length of Greenback for part of his training. So if you don't know Max Baer, he was a hero basically, even though he wasn't raised Jewish. When he was doing his fight against Max Schmeling, he wore the yellow star for the Jews. He was not all the favored star that we know. There was a lot of, he knocked out people, actually killed people in the ring, but he's still a hero for most of us. Anybody recognize that picture? So C is for the Chinese. And when I tell this story, I want to tell a little bit of the bitter with the better. Orangevale, like most of the communities here, down in Napa, almost everywhere, if you wanted it built, you went to the Chinese. If you were digging the ditches, building the railroads, doing reclamation, moving stones, that's who it was. The problem is that one of the people who helped form Orangevale, who is Valentine McClatchy, name that anyone recognizes, he was part of the anti-exclusion movement, and so he was doing a lot to literally foment rebellion against the Chinese. It was almost impossible here. The Anti-Exclusion Act wasn't lifted till, anybody want to guess what year? It was actually 43, and the only reason it was lifted is that we needed Chinese workers to literally replace the Japanese workers that had been here before. There was a lot of terrorism. I'm not going to talk about it with the Chinese because guess what? We talk about it again. Oh, plus the fact that I could talk for hours on the Capri Market. Have you done anything on the Capri Market yet?
Not yet.
You need to. I just want to make one real quick comment. That's the one thing that I remember when I was a kid. That store was so modern. It was that mid-century with the Capri on the top. I used to go in wearing capris. And the Wu family, which you could do a whole 3 years on, literally the work that they did early on at their electric company, but also in revolutionizing what was happening in grocery stores is well worth the story. D is for ditch. And so there were a series of ditches to deliver water to the gold miners originally, beginning in 1854, and I believe that was also here. There was work by the American River Ditch Company on a main ditch, which was completed in 1857, Big Gulch. This ditch ended at Big Gulch, but a smaller ditch named Eureka ran from there to Mississippi Bar through Orangevale, and pipes to the Orangevale Colonization Company. Later extend all the way to Fair Oaks irrigation districts. And again, who do you think built those ditches?
Chinese.
How many photos do you think of Chinese building ditches there are? None.
Got one.
E is for eggs, scrambled, or all you can eat. I have to tell you, I am so glad that I'm here at the range, and I will be here. One of the cheapest breakfasts around, I have to say. But one of the things that I love about Orangevale is that even though a lot of the agriculture has gone down, you have a lot of small farmers that are now doing creating eggs or at the farmers market, which I'll talk about later. F is for the farmers market. How long has it been going on?
Oh my goodness. I'm not sure.
About 12 years, I think.
About 12 years. You would, of course, probably not realize there were farmers markets or public markets long before the WOOs took over the public market. And I'm going to ask for clarification. They took over for somebody else that had it, right?
Lloyd's Grocery.
For Lloyd's Grocery. But public markets were something that the Chinese especially, the reason they most likely named it, they were excluded from almost all the farmers markets in Sacramento and the area, so they found that they had to form their own. And how do I pronounce this one? Thank you so much. So I decided to go a little obscure. Philly's pitcher, Dan Greenlaw. Are you guys aware of him?
You know McNeely, Earl McNeely. But,
Yeah, this is actually a picture of Dan. And one of the things is that Perry and Etta, and I'm going to go through some of these really quickly, built a house in Orangevale in 1912 and lived in the house for the next 65 years. He started a nursery. That nursery actually provided some seeds in Sacramento. So he was able to sell some of his seeds that were started here to seeds and nursery places in what is now River Park and elsewhere. I'm going to ask a question. H is for Heirloom Acre Farms. Operational again?
yeah, Brad.
Yes.
Brad's
How
name.
long was it not here for? How long did it flounder before someone took over?
I don't know. Brad started in what, in 2016, 2017?
So what I love about it is that I can rent it as an Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
That's Phil Walker's old house. And so when he passed, it came on the market. It was never like an Heirloom Farms or a ranch.
Okay, so
farm.
Heirloom Farms, they named it Heirloom Farms when the new people bought it?
Right.
Yeah.
When Phil Walker owned it, he lived there with his family.
Okay, did everyone hear that? Phil Walker owned it as well? And like I said, some of these I'm going through quickly so we can talk about the others. And I is for the indigenous people, but I have to find them first. Hold on.
Where'd you
So-
get the photo?
My private collection.
Oh.
So the one thing I didn't do in my biography is that my brother and I are quarters. Oh, I'm sorry, we're both historians. It starts with an H, right? And so we are known that if we go to an estate sale or someplace else from almost anyone, years and years and years ago, I worked for DQ University. I don't know if anybody remembers DQ. It was actually right outside of Davis. Only 100 students. It was the first time that an indigenous college actually started. And someone was dumping things, and I got a whole treasure trove of Maidu and Nissinan material.
Oh.
90% of it has been donated, and then there's that 10% that I haven't been able to yet. So one of the things that I was going to say is, most of you already know that history, right? I don't have to go through a lot of it. You know the history of this area? So one of the things that bothers me about history in general is if you go to read anything on Orangevale, it all started with the land grant, or it started when the Californians come. And we never talk about the 10,000 years, literally, that there was inhabitants beforehand. And one of the things that I found was the street that I live on in Sacramento was actually a walkway for Indians to be able to sell their goods with other tribes all up and down the state, and it would go from my house and follow, I don't want you to laugh at this, I'm at 23rd and T, what became the Lincoln Highway, that actual path. And this is the one I want to just read to you. Does anybody know very much do you know any Japanese families that live out in Orangevale? This is from the Sacramento Bee, January 1887, and excuse me, but I want to read it completely. The residents of Orangevale are determined that coolie labor shall not be employed there. They have run out all the Chinese, and the latter have been so roughly treated that they would just as soon think of going to Truckee or Eureka looking for work as to go to Orangevale. One day last week, a tract owner named G.G. Roof hired 6 Japs to work on his place. Night before last, according to an account brought down today, 15 citizens with gunny sacks over their heads called on the Japs. A rope was put around each of the little brown men's necks, and their captors started for a big white oak tree some distance away. Roof came out and remonstrated when a rope was thrown around his neck, his captors saying a man was never better than the men he employed. Ruth's wife became hysterical, and the little children were so frightened that they left the husband and father strung up to a limb. They allowed them, let him go. They put up all of the Japs to a limb. They allowed them to kick and struggle until life was almost extinct, and then lowered them. This they repeated several times. When they were satisfied with what they had done, they made the Japs pack up their traps and leave the colony, warning them that if they or any of their countrymen ever came to the colony again, they would hang them up and leave them for the coroner to cut down. So has anybody heard that before? Mark has, because he's done
And there was prosecution on that case, by the way.
There was prosecution.
Yes, there
I
was.
need to find out more. How did it result?
I don't remember seeing the results, but I did see that they were arrested.
Oh, good. And anybody know of Katzenstein?
Yeah.
What can someone tell me about him? Because I know nothing. I'm going to talk about someone else. I just used it because it got to me to how I got to talk about the other person. So anybody can tell me anything about the Katzenstein family?
Well, he was the secretary for the colony.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so as I said, the only reason that I wanted to talk about him was to get to Theodore F. Price and his wife. They were members of the Old Homestead. The Old Homestead was an acting troupe that would come to Sacramento and then perform up all throughout this area and up into the foothills. He sold them a 20-acre tract so that when they were tired of stage life, they could own a snug little place in what they call the North Citrus Belt. They were so delighted with the orchards and vineyards, they purchased it on the spot with the intention of turning it over to Mr. Price's father, who'd been living in Kansas, eking out a miserable existence in a miserable climate. The Prices would entertain visiting actors who would perform pantomimes and other entertainments for Orangevale neighbors.
Just on
Yeah.
Katzenstein, he's the one who coordinated with Hearst to start doing advertisements and everything to bring people. He was part of the Earl Fruit Company and then became the president, like Mark said. But he did a lot of publicity and things like that with the Hearst Examiner. And that's when they had the contest house and everything.
And all the
So,
other. And who are you?
well,
What's your
I'm
name?
just part of the research people.
Pam.
Wonderful.
Pam,
Oh,
hi.
if I can backtrack, this is what impresses me. I have been a member of more historical societies. I've never met a research team. I'm usually it. So I love that you actually have one. And I'd love to get this information that I don't have. That's why I was asking where your archives were. How many of you already know about David Lubin?
Yeah.
Most of you, so I don't have to go through all the work that he did in Sacramento beforehand. So one of the things is that David Lubin escaped. He was a Polish immigrant, And it was impossible. There was a big movement for Jews to move to the United States because they couldn't own property, they couldn't farm. And that's one of the reasons that they found California so interesting. What you might not know about him, and if it's something you know, I apologize, his interest in agriculture and the problems of farmers had already led him to create a new kind of overalls, a clod crusher and cultivator, and 8 additional agricultural patents. So he was actually brought a ranch here, miles from Sacramento. He started orchards and wheat farms. I might say that the kind of wheat that he grew can now be purchased at Chili's on Fair Oaks. Full Belly Farm is actually growing the same kind of wheat that he grew there. He, with his brother-in-law, talked to other people to actually start Orangevale as a Jewish agricultural community or utopia. But he didn't just work alone. The person that I hate more than almost anyone is Valentine McClatchy. I could do a whole thing on how horrible he was, but he also invested a lot to bring people here as well. One of the things that you might not know about him is that because he had a farm in Orangevale, he had a hard time getting his fruits and vegetables to market. So he was able to do a postal initiative so that you could send the first, what we now call CSAs, the first vegetables and fruits in the mail. And in 1914, the Woodrow Wilson administration picked up that idea to ship them. And the farm-to-table, recognize that term? Farm-to-table postal movement lasted from 1914 until 1920 and has been credited with helping to revolutionize not only mail order, but our highway system. So for Sacramento that thinks that they coined that term in 2012, I'm sorry, but Orangevale resident at the time, David Lubin coined it. Yeah, we can give a clap for that one. Music venues. So what is happening? The boardwalk just opened up again, am I right?
Yeah.
And I had a list of who can name the 8 other places that were in the same location before it became the boardwalk.
Pam.
Pam can.
Pam can.
Pam, stand up.
No, I don't think I can put them all in the right order. I put it.
It doesn't have to be in the right order.
Oh, well, there was the boardwalk, or before the boardwalk was Cowtown, but way back was
Williams,
Dr.
right?
Catching me on a bad time, was the aquarium.
Right.
There was the was it the Palms? Something place.
Yeah, there were 8 that surprised
Was it
me.
Williams?
Williams Place, that was another one.
Right.
Then there was some really odd
Yeah,
ones.
there was quite a few, yeah.
There were 8 altogether.
Well, I never knew about the boardwalk until my stepson plays for the newly formed Still Breeze,
Oh.
and has for like the last 10 or 15 years. But in 1986, I came out here for the first time. It might have been the first time I came to Orangevale, by the way. Literally, to be able to listen to Still Breeze there. One of the things is that David Barton, who is the music critic for the Sacramento Bee, he's now an actor in New York, has done an incredible history, which he was supposed to send me about this place and all the places before. When he sends it, I will send it to you.
Yes, please.
There was a lot of people that played at that place.
Oh,
Like
and Charlie Peacock, yeah.
Yeah, like Tesla played there, and Still Breeze. We went to high school with Skip Morardi, who
Oh,
played
wow.
for Still Breeze. I didn't notice that he played very long, but we went to high school with Skip.
No, that's wonderful. No, it was an incredible venue, and who knew?
And Rutabaga Boogie Band. There was some
Yeah. Okay, new is for newcomers, and the reason that I bring this up is that I interviewed a woman by the name of Sandra Till, who's only lived in Orangevale for 3 years. Her husband's uncle died, left them the property, they moved out. And what she talks about in the interview I've got is how warm everybody was in Orangevale, how they just instantly took to her. She has a 1-acre farm, and she read a book from a UC Davis person who did a 1-acre farm in Davis. She took her 1 acre to grow wheat, and she is now growing the wheat, milling the wheat, selling the flour and making bread. And she's at the farmer's market, which is where I met her. All right, O is for Orangevale. Somebody here, come up to the mic and tell any story you want about Orangevale.
Oh, wow.
Don't look at me.
Not Pam, no. It'll take too long.
Or anything that starts with Orangevale. No? How many of you have lived here? Yes, are you willing to come on up? Come on up.
I'll tell a story.
Okay.
This town started in 1888 officially.
There you go.
Well, this place started in 1888. And we heard rumors that historical societies might be starting. But I have to tell you, I'm bragging on you. I have seen the most incredible people walk through the door in the last, year and a half to form this great group, and I applaud you. That's history.
And I'm going to ditto that. The amount of information that you guys have acquired literally in 1 year, the type of organization that you have to form a group like this. I'm a member of the Conference of California Historical Societies, which has dwindled from 4,000 societies down to 400. I am so impressed that I think I'm going to nominate you for an award this year.
Oh.
But you might have to pay $25 to join the organization. How many of you remember the Pink Pussycat Theater? How many of you
Went there.
got carded at the Pink Pussycat Theater? My brother did, I have to tell you. So when I got interested, I love to do the history of burlesque and vaudeville in America. And I was really intrigued because it was in 1969, I was just starting college, when the trial of two dancers and the owners of the Pink Pussycat Club in Orangevale were arrested on charges of indecent exposure and obscenity. That literally brought national notoriety. You guys had so much press, you can't believe it. No one had a place to stay though. So is there a hotel in Orangevale? Yes, ma'am.
No, I just wanted to know where was it located?
Okay.
Bad
Where-
fish coffee.
Across, and where is the,
On Greenback, Bad Fish Coffee. They're global.
So how I first found out about it was I was able to meet Judge Earl Warren Jr., who was
wow.
the presided over that case. He has a lot of his mother's and grandmother's recipes. That's why I was meeting him. He actually declared that the defendants were not guilty. And changes were made to state and local regulations defining when a performer could show total nudity. And it was basically, you could show total nudity, but not where alcoholic beverages could be consumed. Did it stay open for much longer?
I'm not sure.
And Q is for the Quad Bridge Colony. Mark.
What?
So I wanted to say that I loved it. I did a lot of research trying to do as much. I got caught up in so many of the interviews that you did, the woo system. I mean, I must have seen 8 of them. So by the time I got to Quad Bridge, I lasted about 10 minutes and said, let Mark tell. Go on.
Quad Bridge Colony, it's on our YouTube channel, by the way, so I'm not going to go very far into it. But yeah, you had to cross 4 bridges to get from Orangevale to Folsom in the early days. And we did the research to figure out where they were at. And we found the Lost Bridge. That's one of the last things we mentioned. But there were 3 generations on some of the bridges that they did. The first one being the Colony, put in 3 bridges that were pretty rickety. Then they got replaced by the Board of Supervisors with some better bridges around 1900. And then finally we had, of course, the Orangevale Bridge, the Gold River Bridge, which is still with us, in 1915. And they went ahead and skipped the other 2 bridges, either filled in the culvert or they changed the route so that we only had 1 bridge to get over to the river. And then that was the second bridge, of course, which was the Rainbow Bridge over to Folsom. There you go.
Thank you. You did that pretty well. And there are people yay, Canada! Can I get an applause for Canada, please?
Canada.
Thank you. We actually have people who live here. I can't believe it. Orangevale is their vacation home. When they live on Vancouver Island, I think they're a little crazy, but that's okay. And they said that they didn't know very much. So most of you are probably aware that California basically had, at one point, I think it was 800 different land grants that were given by the Mexican government. They were concerned that the Indians were so unruly that they wanted people elsewhere to come and to actually build up settlements to be able to control the Indians, or the indigenous people. They didn't think that they could do it themselves. So, and I hope that I'm not repeating all of this. Later they were put into smaller plots, but the Mexican government, Micheltorena, granted 19,900 acres of Orangevale land to Joel Dedman in 1844. While land changed hands often from the Mexican land grant until the 1880s, this says a group of 5 businessmen. I have found a lot more.
Yeah.
So I'm going to correct that one, and I actually have a list of a lot of them. One of the things that I thought was so interesting, especially because of the agricultural utopia that was going to be formed here, is that the biggest food people in Sacramento, Drescher's, Wood Meat, Moore and York, Krause, Halls and Lures, those were the people who invested because they saw that if they could not have to ship out the really high quality land, that they could grow peaches and pears and almost everything under the sun here. And it was successful. And there are some great books done on the land grants. Who's heard of Sally Schmidt? Anyone here? Or Hank Shaw? You should, because they're the most nationally known of any Orangevale residents, I think, even that baseball player. Sally Schmidt just died recently. She was 96 years old. She was featured in the New York Times as the best chef in America.
Wow.
So her family had a farm, first in Roseville, then they came out to Citrus Heights. She left Citrus Heights to go start a new restaurant in the Napa Valley called the French Laundry.
Oh, man.
So prior to this incarnation, the French Laundry was wonderful. What she did, to me, she was the one who really created what is called California cuisine. Everything was fresh and local and seasonal. And it was a fantastic restaurant. Later, she started a hamburger place in Yountville also that was vintage 1870, I think is what they call it now. But she then moved from there, her husband died, she moved to Philo, where she just passed away. Some of the best apples in the country are there. But for me, long before Alice Waters, anybody heard of Alice Waters, Chez Panisse? She claims to have started that movement, not true. I really think that Sally did. And Northern California. The other person I'm going to credit was up in Jackson. She owned the Argonaut Inn, Kay Sinclair. Kay Sinclair also lived in Orangevale for a whole 4 months. But I think you should claim her for almost anything. Hank Shaw is a James Beard Award-winning blogger. He was the first food blogger to ever get a James Beard Award, the prestigious award from it. He created a website or a blog called Hunter, I never remember it. Okay, I will get it. So he did Hunter, Angler, Gardener, and Cook. And then he's done other cookbooks, including Duck, Duck, Goose, Buck, Buck, Moose, and then Hook, Line, and Supper. And one of the things that I really admire about him, he sold, well, I'm going to put this too in full. Well, you know the answer. He has sold more books than Rachel Ray. But he didn't have a big distributor. And he lives here in Orangevale. His wife is the photographer for his books. But he decided decided that because he couldn't get a major publisher, he would publish it himself. He was the first cookbook author that put his book up on, not GoFundMe, Kickstarter, and was able to sell 20,000 books pre-order so that he could purchase it. Sold a lot more than Rachel Ray.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Is he alive? Is he still?
Yes, he's a young man. He's younger than I am.
Well, then you should give the contact information to.
Oh, he would be a fantastic speaker.
And
He's a wonderful.
No, I think he'd be a great member.
Yes, he would actually. No, he would. He'd be a great
Benefactor,
speaker
perhaps.
because he knows the backwoods here better than anyone. Yes, so you should.
All right.
I will give it to you.
Thank you.
It could cost you a little. I have to tell you, he's also the only person that when I said, can I take you to lunch, picked the most expensive restaurant in Sacramento, and then ordered appetizer, salad, dessert, and the main meal and 2 drinks. Uh-oh, are we taping that?
Thanks for the warning.
I'll make sure he doesn't see it. T is for temperance. And that was the one thing, originally this was going to be Orangevale is for taverns, and then I couldn't find any. And then realized that Orangevale was a tri-town. It didn't even really have roadhouses. It was a little bit off the beaten track for being able to do that. But what it had was, you used another term, they had something called the Upright Anti-Saloon group at one point. So what did you call it, Mark?
I don't remember, actually.
Okay.
But we did have bootleggers.
You did have, oh, that I want to find out about. I do a talk on, what is it, bordellos? No, it was brothels. Brothels are in there somewhere. But one of the things that shocked me is the Women's Christian Temperance Union had a lot of Orangevale women that actually belonged to it, and a lot of them actually formed another women's group later. One of the things that they did was, because it was already a dry town, they said, well, what can we affect? So they went to Sacramento, and they tried to get legislation through that would not allow any saloon to have a front entrance or side entrance. Front entrance only, because they figured that men were coming in side entrance and being able to cheat, and cheat in more ways than one, because that's where the ladies of the evening also went in. I'm sorry. Oh, so one of the things that I was going to say, where I found this story actually was for, again, I will give you the interviews that I did, and it was somebody who said he got this from his grandfather, that because it was a dry town, they were trying to decide what it was that they could do to get a drink. So there were people who had kind of boarding houses. That's what they called them. So visitors from San Francisco or elsewhere could come up, spend the night, have some drink, have a little ribald conversation, and if you left a little money on the table later, that was okay. Anybody remember the UFO stories out here? Flying saucers, actually. So flying saucers have hit the Folsom Orangevale area lots and lots of times. City papers ran front page stories, television and radio, commenters would do it. Again, the story went national. What happened is that the US government poo-pooed it and said, I have a Canadian story. They said the Canadians are actually testing planes that look just like flying saucers. And that's what they are. But this is, again, I'm going to read this to you. That wasn't the only sighting, however. In 1964, I couldn't find the name. Mark might be able to do this, or your research team. While hunting deer with friends, a 27-year-old Orangevale man was near Emigrant Grab when he got lost during the hunt and decided to sleep in a tree. So he actually attached himself to it. While in the tree, he noticed a glowing light near a ridge, and a vehicle appeared to land on the ridge. He then described someone approaching him in nearby shrubbery, and that's when he saw them. They were garbed in a silver-like suit, but visually had the complete absence of a neck. These strange individuals had unusual facial features, especially in the region of the eyes that protruded extensively. So, what do you think the U.S. government said about him? Overactive imagination. V is for vegetarians. How many vegetarians do we have in the group?
Yeah.
Well, you had a lot of them at one point. So as well as this being kind of a Jewish agricultural utopia, there were also groups that would come in from other utopian societies here that led a vegetarian lifestyle. Because they met, remember that horrible person? Oh, I keep on saying this on tape. Valentine McClatchy from the Sacramento Bee and his brother believed that women, not men, should learn how to cook. So they were actually encouraging to have pure food. Adulteration was a real issue. They were encouraging the vegetarian society, and that's what they called themselves. It didn't start in Orangevale, but a lot of Orangevale residents were part of it. So the whole pure food, unadulterated, healthy living kind of started here. You just told me some horrible things about him.
I'm sorry.
So W is for Moses. How do you pronounce that last name again, Mark?
Warhoftig? I think so.
Yeah, Warhoftig. So remember we kind of talked about David Lubin and others who wanted to create the Jewish agricultural utopia. He took them up on their offer. He settled here along with his mother, his brother Peter, and family on one of the plots. They, like all the others, I think there were 10 families, had no experience as farmers. He was also a printer. That's how I got introduced to him, because I love the history of type. And Peter, lawyer, betrayed. But soon enough, the family was really successful enough to purchase 10 acres each. An invasion, as you all know, of locusts in 1891 destroyed Moses' farm, and he quit to start a newspaper. Most of the other colonists failed then, or in 1905 when a severe drought, does that sound familiar, started with them. One of the things is that Peter ended up schooling himself in sustainable farming methods, and started growing tokay grapes, peaches, olives, and other fruits through at least the 50s. But do you want to tell the bad part of his story, Mark?
Do I?
Why not? I think it's appropriate.
Well, he was also a member of the Exclusion League for the Hindus that were looking to buy land in Orangevale. So he had his name in the list of folks. Being a refugee from Russia, it was kind of a surprise to see his name in there with the folks that were trying to keep the Hindus out of
In
Orangevale.
1920.
Yeah.
All right. So I said I have to use those X's. And if anybody else, I was looking for Xenia, anything I could. Suddenly I realized, thank God I have Chinese grandkids and a daughter-in-law. Because every Chinese vegetable starts with an XI. So, and this is grown here in Orangevale. Jingwa, watermelon, Jingzi, which is apricot, and Jinghua, which is broccoli. And I specifically went to Wame, is that how you pronounce it, the Chinese restaurant, today to see if they were using Orangevale Chinese broccoli. They had broccoli, but it wasn't from Orangevale.
Oh.
But again, this is a watermelon that I bought at your farmer's market this last summer. So even though it's just the word for watermelon, this is actually one that started in China and then came to the United States. How many of you have heard of the Youth Center Parade and Festival? How many of you actually were in it? Anyone? So this is one of the things that I remember. My mother wanted me to be Miss America. And literally on her, and you can tell I'm not wearing makeup today. So on her deathbed, I actually asked her, what's the one thing that disappointed you? And she said, you didn't run for Miss California or Miss Sacramento. But I have met a number, and I should have shown the picture of Miss Orangevales, who have gone on to others. So what I found was it started off as a youth center parade and carnival, went to chuck wagon days, and later that evolved, or at least my history says, to powwow days. How accurate is that, Mark?
Yeah, there's Fiesta Days in there as well. Yeah.
Okay.
There's Western Days.
So this is a picture of Linda Field, and this is her daughter, Leanne. And she would lead the Orangevale Velveteers. Anybody a Velveteer?
Velveteers?
Anybody heard of the Velveteers? In the Children's Camellia Parade. And again, I have camellia posters, and that was in my private collection. And we're almost to the end, and then we're going to have you guys ask questions or add some stuff. Z is for ZP Brandon and his wife and the Zombie Hut. So on November 9th, 1891, ZP Brandon, I cheated a little, and his wife owned tracks 173 and 174. They died from the effects of arsenic, placed by mistake instead of baking powder in biscuits eaten, I hope not at the Grange breakfast. A son and a young woman who lived with them all were also poisoned and did not survive. A friend, I'll get to that page in just a second, passing by would have eaten their biscuits, but her missing cow came by and she was saved. So I have to say that the young men were amateur taxidermists, and they had used the poison for preserving birds. So how it got into the biscuits, I'm not sure. This was the total shock for me. How many of you knew that there was a zombie hut in Orangevale?
Yeah.
So you actually went, what years was it?
I never went there, I just know there was one. I think it was over by the Black Stallion. Wasn't that where it was?
Everything was there in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, there or across the street, but I think the zombie, do you remember where it was? Yeah.
So the zombie hut, what I knew the zombie hut, it was one of the most popular tiki bars at all in Sacramento. And one of the things, one of their best dancers was a woman who was the first or second police officer in Sacramento County. And she didn't earn enough money, so she would dance the hula at the zombie club. And her sister used to say that she would pack her pistols by day and her hips at night. All right. And how many minutes do I get to do that in, Mark? Do we know?
It was 2 hours.
But it was even.
I can, so am I about the end? Is there, if there's anything anybody wants to add, corrections to what I've got, stories that you think that I need to capture. I am on the Conference of California Historical Societies. I'm supposed to be attending your monthly meetings as part of my job.
Here you are.
And here I am. Yeah, I can claim this one. But I'm going to throw it over to Mark, and if there's anybody with wants to come up to the microphone, has questions that I can answer,